All right, today we're diving into a really critical moment in the ministry of Jesus. This is the point where this massive grassroots popularity starts to collide with some very powerful, very organized opposition. And this isn't just a story about faith, it's about conflict, it's about strategy, and some pretty surprising tactical shifts. And that really brings us to our big question. What actually happens when a popular movement hits a wall of powerful opposition? Does it just fold? Does it change its tactics? Or does it somehow find a new way to get even stronger? Let's get into it. So to really get our bearings, we're zeroing in on this crucial middle period of his public work. The initial message has already spread like wildfire, but now the opposition isn't just some background murmur anymore. No, it's becoming direct, it's organized, and it is hostile. This is the turning point. The first major showdown, the one that really signals this big shift, doesn't actually start with a controversial teaching. It starts with an act of healing, which is pretty surprising. So the scene is most likely Capernaum. And Jesus heals a man who is just suffering from so much. He's possessed, he's blind, and he's mute. Now, you would think this would be a moment for, universal celebration, a really clear sign of divine power and compassion. But that is not what happens. Not even close. Instead, these religious leaders, scribes who've come all the way down from Jerusalem, make this shocking public accusation. They don't deny the power. They can't. But they say it comes from the source of all evil, from Beelzebub, the devil. I mean, this isn't just a disagreement. This is basically a declaration of war. And then the opposition doubles down. They demand some kind of big, heavenly sign to prove his authority. But instead of another miracle, Jesus gives them this cryptic prophecy, the sign of Jonah. He's talking about the prophet who was in the belly of a great fish for 3 days, which is a direct parallel to his own coming death and resurrection. He's telling them the ultimate sign they're looking for isn't going to happen on their terms. So all this growing conflict, it forces a really significant change in his teaching strategy. He doesn't stop teaching, not at all, but he completely changes how he teaches. He pivots to using parables. Now, a parable is pretty simple, really. It's just a story from everyday life, things like farming or fishing, that's used to illustrate a much deeper spiritual truth. It's a really powerful, but also kind of indirect way of communicating. So why the switch, right? Why adopt a style that almost seems to hide the meaning? Well, it looks like it was a direct response to all that hostility. For people who were genuinely eager to understand, the parables offered these incredibly rich insights. But for his opponents, who were just looking for words to twist and use against him, the meaning was hidden. And in a very short period of time, he delivers this rapid-fire series of parables. They cover everything you can imagine, from growth and judgment to the incredible value of his kingdom. But here's the key. The sources are very clear that he only explained the deeper meanings to his inner circle, and he did it in private. Now, at the exact same time that his public teaching is becoming more veiled, his public displays of power become more dramatic and more undeniable than ever before. It's this fascinating contrast. And this is really the central tension of this whole period. On one side, you have human opposition that's getting louder and more organized. And on the other side, Jesus is demonstrating this unbelievable power over every domain you can think of: nature, the supernatural, and even death itself. First, let's look at his authority over the natural world. While they're crossing the Sea of Galilee, a violent, life-threatening storm just erupts out of nowhere. His disciples, who are experienced fishermen, are absolutely terrified. And Jesus just speaks, and the storm instantly stops. Next up, he confronts the supernatural. Over in the Gerasene region, he meets a man who's tormented by what the text calls a legion of demons. And in this stunning display of authority, he casts them all out, completely freeing the man. And finally, we have the ultimate demonstration: power over death itself. A synagogue ruler, a guy named Jairus, begs Jesus to heal his dying daughter. And even though he gets delayed on the way, he arrives to find out the little girl has already died. He simply takes her by the hand and brings her back to life. Now, you'd think this crescendo of power would lead to acceptance, but it doesn't. In fact, it leads to his most personal rejection yet. And that rejection becomes the catalyst for a radical new strategy for his whole movement. The crucial turning point happens right after this. He goes back to his hometown, Nazareth. But the people there, the ones who knew him as a boy, they just can't accept his new authority. The accounts actually note that their profound unbelief limited the number of miracles he performed there. It was just this final, painful rejection from his own community. And this rejection is the trigger. You see the pattern? He faced the opposition head-on, he was rejected by his own people, and now it was time for a major strategic pivot. The mission just couldn't depend solely on him being in one place at one time anymore. So he implements this brand new strategy. For the very first time, he sends his 12 closest followers out on their own. They go in pairs without him to preach, to teach, and to heal. He's multiplying his efforts. He's decentralizing the entire movement. And the effect was immediate and it was dramatic. The movement suddenly had a much, much wider reach. So much so that word gets all the way to the local ruler, King Herod, who becomes deeply disturbed by all this. He actually starts to fear that John the Baptist, the man he had beheaded, has somehow risen from the dead. So, what happens when a popular movement meets powerful opposition? Well, this story suggests an answer. When a leader faces that kind of intense rejection, it doesn't have to be the end. Instead, it can become the very thing that empowers others, that decentralizes the mission, and that turns a moment of crisis into a whole new chapter of growth.